Today's project. This lens is a Voigtlander lens, a colour Scope X. It belongs with a Voigtlander Bessamatic camera, and this needs to be serviced. So I'll show you how you go about doing that. The first thing to do is we need to remove the front group. Now, unlike the Kodak lenses, these are constructed slightly differently, but the front group does unscrew. Now, you could use a friction tool like this, or a rubber sheet if you can get enough grip on it. Now, it's likely that the front group is stuck with something. It's not uncommon for them to have been stuck with a dab of lacquer or something to lock the threads. This one wasn't bad to get loose, and I don't actually see any sign that it was ever locked in there, so that might be a good example. You may find that you have more trouble fighting with your one. But that removes the front group completely from the mount, and the rear group, that'll have to come out with a friction tool. There's nothing to grip on there. I'll find another one and see if I can get that loose. No, that doesn't want to come loose. Might have to resort to extreme measures. Well, that was an abject failure. I got nowhere with that. The friction tool will not loosen that rear group. I'll continue with it in place. That's okay. We can do that. So, what do I want to do? Well, the first thing I need to do, I'll zoom you in a little bit, is remove the lens capsule from the mount. And the lens capsule is fixed to the lens mount with 3 screws and washers, and they couple the lens mount to the outer helical here. Now, that's quite stiff with dried out grease. That'll explain why it was a bit stiff feeling. I'm just checking the state of the diaphragm. That appears good. There's no great signs. Oh, there's a bit of oil contamination on there. I might see if I can get rid of that. I didn't see that from the back. That's entertaining. I really need that rear group out to deal with that. Oh well. What are my options? I think that my best option here will be to cover the glass of the lens with a piece of tape while I'm working on it. Cut a little notch in here, and then use that to engage a tool to remove that group. However, let's deal with this piece first. This is our mount. There's a little bit of roughness there. It's maybe a bit of dust in there. So in from the back, there are 4 screws. There's a few variations with these types of lens mount, decal lens mounts on the Voigtlander or the Kodak Retina S type lenses, but they have a lot of similarities. So normally I just lay the parts out. I'll zoom you back out. So I know where they are. Here's our rear mount. Now interestingly, this comes off a Bessamatic, but it has the rangefinder coupling ring on the back of it. I would be interested to know whether that would couple to a Retina 3S camera. I suspect it might. That'll be something I'll investigate later. I'll have to get a Retina Reflex S up and running with a mount adapted to suit the Voigtlander lenses. So, excuse me, back to it. Let's get these pieces off this lens. That shim. This ring. One of the depth of field pointers. The little cam. Spacer between the depth of field pointers and the other depth of field pointer. Here we've got 4 clamps that hold little wedges in place that hold the front and rear section together. In this case they're loose. Also a bit of dust in there, they're loose and rattly. That lens shouldn't rattle like that. So I'm going to remove these 4 screws. This screw here is a post with a return spring on it for that first depth of field pointer. I've got to see if I can get that off there. Yes, because I've got to use a screwdriver with a split tip on it in order to couple with this screw and undo it. I may not even need to move that at all with a bit of luck. I'll remove these other 3 screws. I like to get that spring off because it's easily damaged. Fine screws, springs like that are easily damaged, and of course they're hard to find things like that. Effectively you've got to find they're going to come from an organ donor. They won't come from the spring shop. I'll remove those 3 screws, those 3 wedges, and I should be able to separate it at this point. There's that last wedge, 3rd wedge, and the 4th wedge, that's held on with that screw, that's post. I'm going to leave that in place. I may not need to disturb that, which means I don't have to fight with it. Finding a screwdriver that is narrow enough to fit over that screw nicely and having a big enough slot cut in it so that it'll fit over the pin in the middle is not easy. By the time you remove that much meat, the screwdriver is very weak. So these parts need to be clean. You can probably see that's quite dirty. Some of that would be, the darkness would actually be from the graphite grease. That's certainly not a bad thing of itself, but I can see there's a lot of dust in there, and you see a lot of this yellow staining. That's dried out grease. This piece in much the same state. All this filth's got to come off. I'll clean this down. I'll be using naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, and the stuff I've got here at the moment, that's in a venti tin, but actually it's naphtha that I buy a litre at a time, and I just put it back into this container because it's a very handy container for it. But cigarette lighter fluid, whatever you've, whether it's Roncinol or whatever it is that people pour into their Zippos, that's what you want. So I'll clean these components up, and when I've got them all clean, you can watch as I reassemble it. You can see here that I've covered the rear lens element there with a bit of masking tape, and I've cut 2 notches into the lens mount itself there so that I can engage a tool and unscrew that. That's my next task. You can see I've got a tool here. This has got a milled edge on it so that it's got quite a narrow tongue along here to engage on things, and you can see here that this piece has been milled out to give some clearance. The centre of the rear group is convex, of course, so it sticks up a little bit higher than the edge, so I need to make sure there's clearance on this tool above the glass. And now what I'll do is I will mount this in a vise and then grab the lens from the outside and rotate it to unscrew that lens group. That worked exactly as expected, and now I've got that rear lens group loose. I'll peel my little bit of masking tape off there now. Hasn't left too much sticky residue on the lens, which is all to the good. And I'll just spin off with my fingers easily enough. And all I'll need to do is touch up those spots. I could probably do a couple of things. I mean, I could touch them up with black paint, but it's probably just as easy to touch them up with a black marker pen. So I'll pop that to one side, and I've got the capsule here itself. And what I'm wanting to do here is clean the oil off those diaphragm blades. These diaphragm blades are pretty fragile. The rivets in them are prone to coming adrift if they're mistreated in any way. Mistreating in this case would mean probably a build-up of oil on them, causing them to stick, so that on one nice cold morning you went and moved the aperture setting ring. The diaphragm didn't want to move with it, and something would tear off. So these I'm going to clean those blades just by using cotton buds and some solvent. I'll try naphtha and see how that goes. There are blades in 5 positions, but there are 2 pieces to each blade. It's quite a complex little piece. It's no fun to reassemble, and I'm not taking it apart just for the joy of that, and I don't need to. So I will clean all this in place. I'm very happy with the state of the diaphragm now. Those blades look nice and clean. They're certainly moving smoothly. That's how many cotton buds I had to use on that, and I was using this CRC heavy duty Electra Clean to do that. You have to be very gentle, take your time. The blades are easily damaged, and one way you can also create lots of damage is get the blades nice and wet with solvent, have them fully open like that and let the buggers fly back, and you're just as likely to tear one of those pins off those blades as quick as a wink. So be very cautious, take your time, but you can certainly achieve something like that that's nice and clean. No sign of oil on those blades now. They're looking good. So all of my pieces are now pretty much cleaned up here and ready for reassembly. That's my next task. I'm ready to start putting this lens back together now. Everything's cleaned and ready to go. I think I'll start with the lens mount at the back of the camera for no particular reason. This piece, this bright brass piece, that's the cam for the rangefinder. If the lens was fitted on a rangefinder camera that was so designed, I don't believe that Voigtlander ever made a rangefinder camera that would have taken these lenses. They are not the same as the decal lenses fitted to the Voigtlander Vito T cameras, Vitessa T. They were a different style. So I've just put a bit of molybdenum paste on that to make sure that that moves smoothly. and that's retained with 3 small retainers. I wonder whether Voigtlander had plans to make their equivalent to the Retina 3S camera at one stage. Perhaps they did. That's nice and smooth. Put that to one side. So get the front part together now. Take some molybdenum paste, run some into that groove. That's where those little wedge pieces run. I'll run some on that front face, which in theory shouldn't really be touching much on the front of the lens, but front's of the mount, but it might do. And this to go on. Now the focus scale part here with the numbers on must go towards this pointer at the top, otherwise it won't fit. See if I can get this into place. There we go. So that's our single wedge in there at the moment. That's the one that was left in there because it was held down by that post, that spring post screw. I'm just putting that one in place because it's awkward to get it in otherwise. You've got to tuck it down under that brass rail. That brass rail is the divider that just keeps the return spring for those depth of field pointers from rubbing on things. And my screwdriver is magnetic again. I only demagnetized that the other day. So I'm just putting one of these wedges in directly opposite the spring post one, and snug that down and check the action. Make sure it's smooth, not unduly stiff, and that there's no rattle. If I flex these, there should be no rattle at that point. If there was rattle, that would tell me that the wedges weren't pushed in far enough. There's no rattle. Just back that off very slightly. Yeah, now I can feel rattle. That's obviously slightly too loose. Just nudge that forward a bit. That's better. Do that up. This one just needs to screw. Tweezers seem reluctant to pick anything up today. Perhaps they've got a bit of molybdenum paste on them. They've got something on them. Just check that everything runs smoothly. It does. And the last of the wedges should go in. These wedges have got some green coating on them. It's like some sort of, it might be a plastic material, perhaps it's something like Teflon, something with those sorts of properties. Checking that it all moves smoothly, checking to see if there's any rattle over the two wedges I've just put in there. That feels right. Oh, it tightened up when I did that. Just back that off slightly. Check it again. There is some movement there, but it's pretty slight. It can be a bit awkward getting the balance right between making sure that there's no slack, no rattle, and having the wedges in so far that it's stiff. That feels good. Now to assemble all the depth of field pointers and so forth to it. The first one goes here. There's a notch in the ring. Let's get this out so you can see it. There's a notch in the ring right here which has to drop over that post there, otherwise you will not get the thing seated. This has to drop all the way down from the top pinion down to the bottom pinion. And our fine return spring, there are two springs, this is the finer of the two, that has to go here on that post. And getting it seated on the post is sometimes awkward. It didn't want to come off, it probably doesn't want to go back on. We're 11.5 hours away from lockdown here in New Zealand, and we'll be locked down for 28 days. I think it's probably likely that there'll be more to follow, however we shall see. Here we go, it's over the post. I'll drop this separator in. Now the separator's got a little notch which drops over that little brass tab I told you about earlier. Get that seated and get the spring connected to the depth of field pointer ring. So far so good. Now there's a small cam. Am I still in camera? Only just. This small cam here goes in next. So I just need to run a bit of molybdenum paste down this crescent shaped cutout so that it'll move smoothly down there. That sits that way up. And our second depth of field pointer goes in here, and the pin on that little cam comes up through the slot in that depth of field pointer. I'm going to move this round until it's at the end of the travel, up against its stop like its mate on the other side. That looks good. The next piece is this one. There's a little pin on the bottom of the hair that drops into that little hole on that cam there. And the return spring also runs over the same post as the first return spring. So there we have it there. I'm just checking the action of that to make sure that those pointers move smoothly. They appear to be good. Now I'm ready to start assembling this mount, and as usual I don't have the gear in front of me. You can all stop looking, I found them. I've got 3 screws here. They've had the heads ground back so that they just act as studs to hold the pieces in alignment while I assemble things. I only bother using 3 of them. 3 is sufficient, and it means that one of the spaces is empty, ready to accept a screw once I get everything assembled correctly without having to disturb anything. That shim goes on. This piece goes on here. Now I've got to align the notch here with the depth of field with the rangefinder coupling in this piece. So I usually align it with that screw hole over there, because that's just a convenient place to find it. So I've got to line this up with that screw hole there and flip this over and lower it onto that lens mount. Make sure that focus thing lines up, and it does. Just flick this because it gets trapped underneath. That's all together. Now I'm holding that firmly with my fingers. I'm interested in the depth of field pointers and where they centre up. Just making sure that they're symmetrical. If they're not symmetrical about the centre, chances are that the pointers are not timed correctly. One of them is one tooth out, but that all looks good. So I can put 1 screw into the mount there. Remove the temporary stud from there and put 1 screw in this position. Check the levers move smoothly, there's nothing catching or rubbing. Pop those 3 studs away, promising to myself I'll know where I can find them next time, but I probably won't. Yeah, an interesting project will be modifying the mount on a Retina 3S rangefinder camera and finding out whether the rangefinder couples correctly to this Voigtlander lens, or one like it, because this one will be going back to its owner. Alright, that looks very good. I'm pleased with that. That's our lens mount component done. We've got the the lens tube itself here, the diaphragm is all cleaned and ready to go. I'll just clean that lens, that's the rear group, and put that in place. I'm only interested in here in cleaning the inside surface. It's got a little bit of an oily patch to that. I think it's just from sitting down on this work pad of mine actually. I don't think there's anything else wrong with that. No, that looks good. So that's fine. That can screw back into here. I'll tighten that lightly. It was pretty much overdone before. And you can see there that I've blackened those notches out, so it looks fine. Just clean that outside surface. There is a mark on the coating on the outside of that lens. It's pretty minor. I'd say it was a handling mark of some sort. Probably the lens has been put down on something it shouldn't have done. So far so good. Pop that away. Actually, unlike the Kodak lens, we're not putting the front in yet. That goes in last of all. So this needs to go into our body now. So there's two things I'm concerned about. That's the alignment of the notch here, where it couples with the mechanism that opens the aperture, and here where the guide post runs. So I'm putting a little smear of molybdenum paste in there, and now I've got to, excuse me, that was the first of probably many phone consultations with my computer repair customers as they get themselves in strife over the next 4 weeks. Of course, I'm not visiting because I'm on lockdown, or will be shortly. I'm certainly not interested in going around there now. And that poor bloke, he downloaded Driver Reviver. And hang on, the door. Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted? Oh, getting this back in. You have to get the tab here coupled with this slot in the diaphragm, and this notch here runs on the guide post here. So it is possible to achieve this. It's just a bit awkward. Now I've got the outer helical off this mount because it's awkward to get this with the outer helical in place. And I can sort of see what I'm doing down in here. Sort of. If I rotate that, it should drop in and I should be coupled. Look at that. That works correctly. Now I can put the outer helical in place. And I'll put one of its fixing screws and washers on there to hold it. Now nothing's going to fall apart while I'm working on it. And I can see my video camera is grizzling and saying that I need to change the battery. So I'll stop at this point and deal with that. Alright, I'm just checking this. This lens goes back too far there, so I'll just move that ring slightly to bring the lens a bit further forward. And I can tell it goes back too far because I can't rotate the mount all the way around to the infinity position. Now I can. So that's a good place to start. So what I've got to do is put this on a camera, put the front group in place, check to see where it is in terms of adjustment. Make my adjustments, take the lens front group out again, make my adjustments, check again until I've got it right. Some arrangements of lenses are easier to deal with than others. Let's get my 3 screws in place. Yeah, it must be a day for interruptions. It's the last day before the lockdown. It was my son called in briefly just before to bring me my birthday present. My birthday's not for about 3 weeks, but of course we'll be in lockdown, so he won't be around here to help me celebrate. So I'll just blow the dust out of there. Fit the front group in place and check this on the camera and find out how accurate the focus is. Well, as luck would have it, the focus is just about spot on. The alignment mark is here and my infinity mark is here, so it's I've got to rotate my scale about 1/2 millimetre less than that, 1/4 millimetre perhaps. So that is just probably more good luck than good management, but that's good. It's not going to be hard to deal with that. So all I've got to do is unscrew my front group again, make a slight adjustment to the position of the focus scale ring on the outer helical. Then I can clean up my front group and put it in place. The lens was there. If I rotate my mount to the stop there, and then I'll check that and see if that's correct, or see if I've gone past the point I should have gone to. No, that's good. That's good. That's very good indeed. So that is pretty much dealt with now. Focus is nice and smooth. I simply have to clean up this front group and put it in place. So there we have it. There's our Voigtlander Colour Scope RX f2.8 50mm lens, all cleaned and serviced and working. And as you can see, it's fitted to a Retina Reflex S camera.